Welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Abbie Richie. I am the host of the show. I'm also the founder and CEO of Senior Savvy. And every week, I'm right here engaging and interviewing people who are working and helping the lives of older adults as it pertains to senior living in the tech space. It's a great place to be because there's so much happening. Before I introduce my guest, I want to go ahead and run the intro. All right. Welcome back to Tech Tuesday. I want to introduce my special guest, Jon Warner. Welcome. Come on board to the show, Jon. Great.
Great. Thank you very much, Abbie. Great to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Before we started the show, we realized it's been several years since we actually talked, right?
Yeah, it has.
And definitely pre-pandemic. And so, when I posted that I was going to have you on, I got so many responses, and people are genuinely really happy that they're going to hear from you today. Before we launch into all of the questions, could you please tell us what you're up to, what you're doing, and who you're doing it for?
Sure. And I'll try and not take too long in doing that. So I spend most of my time these days doing advisory work to organizations in healthcare in general. And then specifically, I have a huge passion for the older adult community. So half of the advisory boards that I serve on are in the age tech space and serving older adults specifically. And the others have got them enveloped within the mix. So I do that across a number of companies here in the US and a couple outside the US, actually. I also run a nonprofit organization called Silver Moonshots. Was an accelerator pre-pandemic. These days is a mentoring organization trying to help particularly fledgling startup companies to get into the older adult space and try and survive and thrive within it, because it takes a little bit of effort.
It certainly does. There's a lot that goes into it. And what I've found from talking to a lot of companies like that myself is that some people have actually never been in senior living before and actually have spent a lot of time with older adults. So the more that they get this wisdom and guidance from you, the better. So I want to know from you, first, let's break this down and let's talk about older adults. Like, we throw this term around a lot in our senior living foresight meetings. Older adults, what's the best way to refer to them? What does it actually encompass? So I want to hear from you. What do you consider an older adult?
Yeah, it's one of those terms that I think we do need to be careful about. And I think older adults is perhaps the most innocent term we can use without upsetting people in so doing. We know AARP uses 50 plus as kind of the leading institution in the land. And I like that term as well, because I think it's as much as anything about healthy aging. And I think we need to go and think about the whole community from an earlier age than the arbitrary 65, this kind of theoretical retirement age. Actually, I then think it doesn't matter what the age is. I just think as we're aging, we want to do so in this healthy manner. I do think we've got to be careful, though, not to be overgeneralize. I think one of the problems is when we say older adults, if we use the term 50 plus, we're into about 130 million people in the US. That's a giant population. Even the 65 plus is well over half of that. So I think we have to realize there's a lot of nuance underneath that category. And I think that's one of the issues I spend a lot of my time advising on with startup companies.
Yeah, I a lot of things come across my plate as well, whether it's on LinkedIn or people I met at CES, for instance. And when people use the word elderly or nursing home, it always just rubs me the wrong way because
Agreed.
there are so many different categories of older adults, and depending on where they live in the country and how involved they were in the corporate world really also dictates how much they're able to continue using technology.
Yes, that's right. And I think that's the problem of generalizing. And I think the other thing to guard against is the ageist nature in some cases of the terminology we use. I keep hearing, for example, silver tsunami, which I don't like at all. I think a tsunami is a very destructive force, and it makes it seem like older adults are a destructive force for bad, and we should watch out. So I think we should retire that. Even in products, to talk about, for example, anti-aging products, says against aging, as if it's a really terrible thing, when we're all going to face getting older inevitably. So I think we've got to watch our own language as part of this.
I'm definitely guilty of using the silver tsunami in different using statistics, in regards to that, because to me it seems like such a powerful force. But now that you explained it that way, I will not be using that anymore.
That's good, Abby. Well, if you can find a good tsunami, then okay, but I haven't seen one yet.
I love that you said that. Thank you. I love that awareness. So when we are talking about big picture trends that are affecting older adults, especially when it comes to healthcare, what kind of trends are you seeing recently?
Well, boy, there's a lot. I mean, I think we know that technology in the last 20 years in particular has been moving at an incredible pace. And we can look across a number of categories, and maybe I'll run through a few of them in a second. But I think the move to digitalization, if you use that as a collective term, is huge in and of itself.
Say that
And
again.
digitizing everything, digital health, digital
Okay.
everything. And I think that's come about because internet access is so much greater than it was. Ownership of smart devices, tablets and phones is so much greater. We know the penetration of those. And even though we have health equity and access issues still, we know a large part of the population are using these tools now.
Mhm.
So I think we're seeing much greater take up, and I think that's a huge trend. And then within that, and in some cases it was fueled by the pandemic, I
Mhm.
think we've seen a lot of take up on the health and healthcare side of things like apps, which are on the wellness side, and digital therapeutics. We've obviously seen a lot of telemedicine and telehealth solutions, other virtual care. I think people are used to terms these days, like remote patient monitoring, when they weren't as little as 5 years ago. I think voice technology is another one that's taken leaps and strides. It's a very short period of time when we weren't even talking about voice being an active part of everybody's home. It's moved heavily institutional living, as you know, in assisted living and IL. So I think we've seen an absolute explosion of technology. And we've seen an equally big take up of that technology in a large proportion of the older adult community.
Yeah, I agree 100%. In the classes that we run, the workshops that we run at communities, we do several of them on patient portals, which can be very challenging for a lot of my students, just logging in,
Yes.
remembering their password. It's usually just, the first couple of steps in getting started. But once they get started, they like it because the follow-up appointments are so much easier when they're done remotely.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point. I think I would say about that whole subject area, the patient portal, the consumer portal, often is called a digital front door these days. I think one of the things when it comes to older adults is to really recognize who's on the other side of that, who is
Mhm.
shopping the digital front door, who's walking through that portal, and understanding their needs. They might need a little bit more hand holding, a little bit more showing in terms of how it works, but you're not going to get any less engagement. And in fact, research suggests you get greater engagement in the older adult community once they know how to use the technology. They've got the time in their hands to do it, and in fact, it goes almost viral. I've
Yeah.
seen, senior living communities where two or three individuals get really, really adept at
Mhm.
using these technologies and show everyone else how to do it. And within literally weeks, the whole community is excited about it.
No doubt. I live very close to the Mayo Clinic. So many of my students are also Mayo Clinic patients. And the Mayo Clinic portal intersects beautifully with with the Apple Watch Health app.
Right.
So I've been able to show many of them how to connect that data that's being kept here to their portal. And, they're very thankful that they can have a bird's eye view and be able to see day to day what's happening with their health data.
Yes, I agree. And if I can, I'll complain to Apple on your show. Here's a very good example of a fabulous technology. I'm wearing an Apple Watch as
Mhm.
well. My issue is that the data is wonderful when you can show people access to it. But
Yeah.
I know even myself, some people struggle as you hit this little button on the side and you have all these little apps. You have to be able to see them. So declining eyesight, for example,
Yeah.
is a real issue you need to be thinking about in customer discovery with the community you're trying to serve, because they want to get to a dashboard where they can see what's going on. And it's going to be a lot bigger than the way it's displayed on this watch, for example. Sometimes even big companies like Apple don't think all the way through the continuum
Mhm.
to make sure that individuals are getting the benefit they can clearly derive from this.
And again, you touched on this earlier. It's the importance and the effectiveness of using the digital assistant within those devices and using the voice option, right?
Yes,
It's like
yes,
my dad, for instance, he talks to his watch all the time
right.
because it's just, it's unusual, right?
Yeah.
And so he's much more adept at talking to it than he is at tapping it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think as a result of that, I think voice has got a very bright future as we
Mhm.
get more devices connected to it and we make the interface that much smoother, turning it on.
Yeah.
We're already seeing some penetration of the TV and streaming services, for
Mhm.
example, where you can talk to it. We know Roku's now are voice activated. It's making life a lot easier for people. So again, with that caveat, we have to show them how this works at the beginning and take a little bit more time on the education side of this than we otherwise might. These are not, 10-year-old kids playing around with something and learning it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Actually, once you've crossed that particular hurdle, it delivers a lot of benefit very quickly.
100%. In the classes that I teach, we do talk about the digital assistants. We talk about starting small, starting simple, just starting with the app based vocabulary, for
Yes,
instance, it's going to help you. And then gradually building on that relationship so that when your eyesight fails you, or when, if the arthritis is too bad to text, you could start using your voice and you've already built up a relationship with the digital assistant.
that's right. That's right. And then do so with a very conscious view of who the user is. So let's go back to this big generalization of older adults. Even simplistically, we know a 50-year-old is probably going to have different reaction times to a 65-year-old, to an 80-year-old, for example. I think designers have got to be cognizant of these micro groups, these nuanced groups that exist within a population, even on
Mhm.
something as simple as an age continuum. That will go further if you'll start thinking about gender. It'll go further as you'll start thinking about even ethnicity in some cases, language. So I think you do need to have a nuanced view of who the user is. And just briefly on the voice side, even the pace at which people speak.
Yeah.
I know all these voice devices sometimes will say, sorry, I didn't hear that, when the person's actually a slow speaker.
Right.
Their algorithm has said, well, they expect to hear a sentence in a much quicker time. The technology is there now to slow this down and make that a very much smoother user interface.
Have you found one that you like better over another one?
In the voice world, I think they're all playing a little bit of catch up with each other. And I
Uh-huh.
think that's what happens. It's almost like watching Samsung and Apple releasing phones, right? I think they, tend to sort of steal away from each other's technology and try and make it better the next time. So I wouldn't want to go and say who's leading now because, in 5 minutes' time, that's going to change around. But I think voice has come a huge way in a very short space of time.
Mhm.
It's catching things more now. I think transcription is become much better. Look at the error rate that we were seeing 5 years ago, say, versus now. It's very small.
Mhm.
Even sending text messages when dictating are something like 98.5% accurate
Yeah.
at first go. That's incredible. And that's really helping older adults who, again, can't see on their phone enough to type with their finger,
Mhm.
even if a younger adult might be sort of tapping away a message very quickly.
Well, they do say that we can speak 4 times faster than we can type. So it is faster. And then additionally, I was going to say that what's really important, and I'm seeing Apple doing more and more, as well as Samsung, is not assuming the default. So if the default, for instance, like you mentioned, the screen times out
Yes.
on an Apple device after 30 seconds, that
Yes.
is the default. Now
Yeah.
that's going to be uncomfortable and inconvenient for someone who needs more processing time to remember where they're going and what they're going to write.
That's right. And I think there's two particular steps I'd advise companies, developers, particularly smaller ones, but it applies to Apple and Samsung and the bigger ones as well. I think one is to do your customer discovery well. Go and talk to older adults. Really get as empathetic as you can with the way they use technology in any environment, whether that's at home or whether they're in an assisted living facility. It doesn't matter. You need to talk to them and understand those nuances. And I think the other is to make sure that your devices, even they do have a default, that they're easily adjustable. And in the starter pack, people are told, if you don't like the response time, if you don't like how quickly this screen turns itself off, if you don't like long passwords and you want a short one, here's the easy way to do it. I think if you do that, the engagement levels you're going to get on those platforms are going to be that much greater. And that's what most tech companies want. They want older adults to be using this technology. So it's a
But
fairly simple
not dumbed
step.
down, 100% not dumbed down. And that's another thing that, we've talked about in our senior living foresight meetings, is that type of technology is not the future, the dumbed down technology for the older adult, because a lot of them have the ability and the knowledge and the interest to use it.
Yes.
And then, the other thing too that I always impress upon my students is that this is your device,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is yours. I want
Yes.
you to customize it. Like, just as if you were going to get in a car, you know what you would do? You'd
Yep.
arrange the mirrors, you'd fix the seat so it would fit you just right. I want you to do the same thing with
That's
your
right.
device.
Yes, I completely agree. And that's why I think if you give people the tools to make those adjustments and make them super easy, they will do that.
Yeah.
And I think it does make it, and then they feel quite proud of their efforts when they discover things on their own. And again, that makes it viral because, when older adults get together, they'll tell each other very quickly the cool stuff they've just stumbled across.
Again and again and again, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let's do some future forecasting if we can. Let's talk about some really cool things you've seen on the forefront that we can anticipate.
Yeah, some of these are going to be what a lot of your listeners, I think, are seeing for themselves. But I'll tell you what I'm kind of most excited about. I think we're obviously in an era now where we hear the word AI a lot, artificial
Mhm.
intelligence, coming into our world. We've been talking about it in terms of voice assistants. That equally goes for chatbots. We're going to be talking to robots fundamentally a lot more in the future. That may sound scary, but actually, I think it's going to be really helpful to the cause because it's going to give people very quick access to information they want.
Mhm.
It's almost like thinking about an app like a map on your, Google Maps on your phone, for example. This is now the go-to. We're no longer getting folded maps out of the glove compartment of our car
Uh-huh.
to get from A to B. I
Yeah.
think these AI assistants are going to get smarter and smarter. And bear in mind, this is only the era of really simple AI. This is not where it's going to end up in, 20, 30, 40 years time.
Mhm.
And I see so many applications of this as the machine learning behind AI learns about people's usage and makes it smarter and smarter,
Yeah.
accommodating individuals in a nuanced way more and more. So I think that's a huge category by itself where we'll see all the apps that people are using, the voice
Mhm.
technology and so on, using this intelligent AI to make things better as they go. And I'm very excited by that because I see hundreds of applications of it already in marketplace, and there'll be many more to come. So that's one big one. Maybe I'll cover one more. I think the other market that I'm excited about is the wearables market.
Yeah.
And I think wearables are interesting. At this stage, they're largely worn outside the body.
Hmm.
And I think there, you mentioned the Apple Watch is one example of that, but
Hmm.
Fitbits and other things that are out there. And I think they're starting to provide both consumer data, which is really interesting about, it might be about the food you're eating, the exercise you're taking, your sleep patterns, etc. And I think this is really helpful to help people live,
Yeah.
longer, healthier lives. But I think it's going to be a short step before wearables become implantables. They're going
Okay.
to be things you swallow. They're going to be
Hmm.
things that are going to be on your body the whole time.
Hmm.
And I think that's getting into another very exciting realm, which is, really understanding biomarkers, really being able to understand how we're ticking at cellular level. And I
Hmm.
think that whole genetics and genomics space will also explode in the next 10 years like crazy. What's the payoff of that? I think for older adults in particular, I think it's going to actually give people two trajectories. I often call this the digital twin. There's kind of you, if you carry on doing what you're doing, maybe not eating properly, maybe not exercising as you should, etc. But there's a second you that you can model, which is where you can start changing your lifestyle and then get a more healthful future. And I think that's very exciting because it means then health span
Yeah.
is greater, not just lifespan. That's what we want, right? We want to live as not only as long as we can, but healthily while we do so.
Yeah, and thank you for that comment, whoever wrote in. I think it's good because if it's going to help you to age in place longer, healthier, it's good. If it's going to help you to know that you can little by little change the trajectory of your health progress or your health goals by doing this, then it's a good thing. It does seem scary, like you mentioned. And when I was doing research for the TED Talk I did this summer, thank you, Steve, on the future of AI and the boomer you love, I did talk about how it does seem scary having these robots around, having, these devices that we talk into. But the
Yeah.
more that we can show the benefit of using them, the easier they'll be adopted.
I think that's right. And I think what we have to be cognizant of always is these are safe to use, that they're built by credible people, they have
Yeah.
good governance systems, good standards, we're
Mhm.
protecting privacy.
Yeah.
I think sometimes some of the startup companies don't realize how far they can get if
Mhm.
they assure their customers well that these
Yeah.
things are being taken care of. Because I think they do have ultimately really good benefits, but people want to make sure they're coming from a credible source, and their
Mhm.
data isn't being sold unwittingly, and some of these things that we read about in the news. So there's a balance here, just in terms of making sure the government systems are in place. At the same time as evolving the technology, and to some extent we're playing catch up because the technology is going a little quicker than our standards are being developed.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to ask you, so if we want to just be able to stay on top of technology, on innovation, especially in this healthcare space, what leaders or what innovators do you follow? Do you look to get to know what's happening out there?
There's a wonderful set of people talking about age tech issues, including yourself, Abby, and Steve Moran, and there are others in the marketplace that talk about this. As we know, I've been part of for a long time now the Aging 2.0 network, which I know has evolved, but nonetheless, there are hundreds of people that I follow in that network alone. I think there are individuals that I particularly like to follow. I'll give you one example. I think Karen Etkin, for example, the gerontologist who lives in Israel,
Hmm.
produces wonderful work because she puts on her annual map a lot of
Hmm.
the new technology and innovation and the changes that are going on by category.
Yeah.
And I think that's always worthwhile paying attention to. But there are literally hundreds of people doing really fantastic work to follow out there. So it certainly keeps me busy reading all of their posts and blogs and everything else that's out there.
100%. And, I totally agree. So, are there any publications that you follow that you continue to read in preparation for mentoring the startups eh, in um, in the nonprofit that you lead?
Yeah, so I follow a lot of people's blog posts
Mhm.
because I've got my own list of favorites, and I think that runs to about 120 now that I keep of individuals who, not only here in the US, by the way, one of the pieces of advice is don't just follow people in the US environment. There's a lot of stuff
Mhm.
going on in the rest of the world where people are doing innovative things. Sometimes we think innovation is wholly within our shores, and it's not. So
Mhm.
I follow blog posts probably more than I do publications, but I'm a voracious reader.
Uh-huh.
And for those of those people out there listening who know me, I post daily on LinkedIn. I'll
Mhm.
very often link to good advice and good information that others have written. So you've only got to go back through a few posts of mine to go and find pretty much my entire list of people that I pay attention to, because
Yeah.
some of their stuff gets posted again and again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I go through some of those market maps and I from other countries and I look up those, the companies and I like to see what's out there. And additionally, when I went to CES last month, going to Eureka Park and walking through all those little tiny booths. I don't know if you were there or not, but yeah, you've probably been there before.
So I've been there before, and I was talking to Andy Miller, who heads innovation at AARP. And
Hmm.
as you know, that pavilion was 12,000 square feet for
Yeah.
older adults. And I thought it looked to be the best booth in the entire show. And that's incredible. Older adults right at the top of the agenda is the biggest booth in the whole of CES. I
Hmm.
thought that was fantastic.
Yeah.
And people should go and look, just go Google it and go and look at AARP CES 2023 and go and look at that village they built in the middle of the show.
Yes, it was totally inspiring. And I love to hear what new technology is out there and what's on the horizon and how it interfaces and how it's going to help us help older adults for sure. Is there, let's see. Okay, oh good. Steve says that most of the LinkedIn influencers he follows are outside the US. Like you have to be able to expand your your network and your influences in some way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And some countries punch above their weight. There's some
Mhm.
really good stuff coming out of Australia, for example, some really good stuff coming out of Holland and Germany and out of the UK. Even the Japanese market, which has an older adult community that's much larger proportionally than ours, have got a lot of innovation going on that's worth paying attention to. So it's worth looking at the international community. And it's why I like Aging 2.0. Even Stephen Johnston, one of the founders, of course, moved to Melbourne, Australia. So he has a very sort of Asian focus just in terms of where he lives these days. So it's worth paying attention beyond these shores.
It sounds to me like we're going to need to do a little more picking through your posts to find what you're talking about. So, yeah, and Steve wants to know what's one bit of technology that we need that has not yet been invented.
Oh boy, that's the crystal ball question. If only
Ooh.
I could come up with that technology, I could go and raise a lot of money and maybe make a lot at the same time. I think what it's going to be, I think it's going to be AI driven in some way. I mean, we saw Chat GPT. I mean, I think it was launched 2 months ago now, and I think we've
Mhm.
had literally millions of people on around the world playing with it. So think of that as a technology, and I think building on top of it. Very
Yeah.
often these days, these are platforms, and they're platforms on which you can sit another technology
Mhm.
and make that available. So I know I'm not being very specific here, but I think once you've actually worked the platform, and I think it's going to be an AI-driven one, I think it could be a whole slew of technologies that might be in the realm of resident engagement. It might be in the realm of voice. It might be in the realm of remote patient monitoring. So I don't think it matters what the end is. I think it's going to be a platform play, and I think it's going to be AI driven.
I want to ask you, is there something that you were really excited about that you were really focused on and invested in that just flopped?
Oh, many times, and I'm
Uh-huh.
sure lots of people in your
Yeah.
audience have had this. So I've been angel investing for 20 years now, and I don't know whether I'm doing better or worse than most people, but I think it's in
Uh-huh.
thirds. A third have failed.
Uh-huh.
They've been very exciting, but the execution path hasn't been what I wanted it to be, and they flamed out. A third have done okay,
Mhm.
meaning maybe I got my money back, but not much else. So it really wasn't worth the investment. Probably would have been better sitting in the bank. And then a third have done okay. And that ranges from a little bit okay to quite a lot okay. I think that's about the team. And I do think it rests on one thing, and that's how well they understand their target customer.
Mm.
That is the key to everything. And
Mhm. Mhm.
it's actually one of the cheapest things you can do. Go out and talk to the targets you want to buy your technology, whether that's B2C or B2B, and really get deep in terms of what their needs are, what progress in their life do they want to make. If you
Mhm.
can nail that, then I think your chances of success are 2, 3, 4x better than if you don't do enough of that. I see too many startups that don't talk to customers anywhere near enough.
Yeah, totally. What progress? What are you afraid of? What's going to make your life better?
Right.
Just a whole bunch of questions to better understand who you're serving and who your
That's right,
technology
and
is.
lots of listening.
Mhm.
So, like in the usual scenario, you maybe will tell people too much about your product. Try
Yeah.
and turn that intention off and
Mhm.
just sit there. And if you can get them talking, 80% of the time, you're probably going to get a much richer result.
And if people want to find out more about you, find out more about Silver Moonshots, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So people are welcome to email me. I'm very open to chatting with individuals. My email has just been put on the screen. People are welcome to email me, and I love chatting to people about what they're up to, what they're doing, and how they're innovating. And then Silver Moonshots has its own website. It's silvermoonshots.org. We're a nonprofit organization. You can see what we've been doing. A lot of what's on the site is what we did in the acceleration period, but these days we do advisory work. I'm more than happy to talk to people further after this.
Awesome. Thank you, Jon. Thank you for being on Tech Tuesday. I know that we had some connection problems getting broadcasting on LinkedIn. So for anyone who joined us later or couldn't join us or anything like that, please go ahead and submit your question in the chat. And, I'll make sure that Jon sees it and we will address it. We thank you for being here with us, and we will rebroadcast this again tomorrow. On behalf of Senior Living Foresight, thank you, Jon, for all you're doing to improve the lives of older adults. And we are grateful to have you here today.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks very much, Abbie.
You are welcome. And we will see you all back here next week. Thank you.